Well, we're going to jump back into Henry Staunton's testimony to the Business and Trade Select Committee today, and he seems to blow the lid on an entirely new, ongoing, current Post Office HR scandal that he says involves not only him as the chair being investigated, but actually that the primary person being investigated is the current serving Post Office CEO Nick Reed, that has just spoken at the Select Committee previously, is alleged to be at the centre of this investigation, and he has concerns over his health. Let's jump into the Select Committee.
Mr. Staunton, Mr. Lavery touched on this earlier, but some very serious allegations have been made both by Mr. Cresswell and by Mr. Tidswell related to your conduct, and that an investigation is currently underway of which you were informed in November. Can I just check, first of all, that you share those recollections that in November you were informed that you were being investigated for your behaviour and conduct?
Yes, there is an investigation. What there is, actually, is Mr. Reed fell out with his HR director, and she produced a speak-up document which was 80 pages thick. And within that was one paragraph there about comments that I allegedly made. So this was an investigation not into me, this was an investigation made into the chief executive, Nick Reed. There's that one paragraph, and you could say actually was about politically incorrect comments that are attributed to me, which I strenuously deny. This was not an investigation into me, this was an investigation based on the 80-page document prepared by the HR director.
So you're obviously accepting... Obviously, you made it clear that you disagree with the allegations, and you're obviously currently going through an investigation. Of course, I wouldn't expect you to comment on a live investigation into yourself. Can I just ask, have you been interviewed at this stage?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
About
only last week I wrote to the barrister giving her further comments. So the fact that somehow I've not cooperated with this investigation is totally wrong. The point of the call with the SID was that this 80-page document was actually taking a terrible toll on Nick Reed. He said, I'm not being supported by the board, and this is just bad news for me and my family. I'm going to resign tomorrow. I've just had enough.
Because I was about to say, the chair did ask the question earlier, Mr. Reed, had he ever considered resigning? He said no. You're saying in a conversation, verbal conversation, he had got to a point where he felt that maybe he was going to have to
The
step
80-page report, of course, alleges that, from the HR director, not my words, that Nick was going to resign because he was unhappy with his pay. She's put that in this document.
So this is quite a damning revelation, really, if it's proven to be true. I mean, obviously the document there that they've got is quite heavily redacted, so it would seem like the Select Committee would need to see the unredacted version. But to claim that it says something, presumably in his post as Post Office Chair, he would be privy to access to the unredacted report during his tenure, it would be quite foolish, would it not, to say that a document contains something when, if it wasn't true, presumably the Post Office HR Director could provide the unredacted version to the inquiry. But it's quite notable there that he's contradicting what Nick Reed has previously said to the Select Committee. I've never considered resigning. Henry Staunton saying he actually did say that, yes, he was under investigation, but it wasn't an investigation into him. There was some kind of wide-ranging investigation, HR investigation, going on at the Post Office, which was triggered for some reason that we're not sure of yet, and that he's been accused, what he says, of, in quite a small part of it, of making politically incorrect statements, which may or may not be true. We'd obviously have to hear from him and hear what the investigation concludes on that. But it's clearly at odds with what the Post Office CEO has said before, where he's turned around and said that he's not considered resigning. Henry Staunton is firmly of the view that he has, and he was complaining about his pay. And having just looked it up, just for context, it says that Nick Reed, who is the current CEO of the Post Office's pay, is currently a salary of £436,000 a year.
Sure.
I'm absolutely positive.
Because you'll understand that the concern here is that you're obviously your comment, which I will come to initially, about obviously or your interpretation of your meeting with Miss Mumby, that has led to obviously communication between, well, via the newspapers, between yourself and the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, essentially, about your dismissal. We're now adding Mr. Reid into this story. You'll accept that for sub-postmasters and postmistresses across the country, this is starting to look like a complete and utter shambles. Absolutely. To be perfectly frank, it's probably the politest way I've been able to. People will be shocked I was that polite, but like an utter shambles in how this is looking. And now we've got another name in the ring here, and so this only produces more mud, more grey area. When actually, as again, what the point of this session is, and I appreciate your contrition in what you said earlier about the situation regarding sub-postmasters and postmistresses, that this will only add further delay, further lack of attention to the victims of this massive injustice in our criminal and civil sector of law. And so do you regret now that we're in this situation where we're having trial by media and an HR dispute by media, which seems also utterly new to me, when actually it's drawing attention away from the Mr. Bateses and others?
I couldn't agree with you more. This should all be about the postmasters and their families and how their lives have been wrecked. That's what all of this should be about, and nothing else. The rest is just flim-flam. I know we can talk about easy issues, I don't want to play them down, but that's what this is all about, is the postmasters. So I don't disagree with you one bit.
And can I just quickly clarify one further thing? So obviously you're currently under investigation for allegations that you've said you claim is a paragraph in an 80-page document.
Yeah, paragraph 2.7.
Is your understanding that Mr. Reid is also under an investigation?
Indeed. Yes. His investigation for this investigation is primarily into Nick Reid and the 80-page dossier.
Okay,
so this is quite a damning allegation there. So essentially, the former chair of the post office is saying, admitting that, yeah, what Kemi Badenoch says is true. I am under investigation, but I think he rejects the characterisation that it's him under investigation. It's a wider issue at the post office, but he's now identifying the current CEO of the post office as being the primary individual under investigation in this 80-page report.
Well, at the moment now we've got yourself as the former chairman, who was the current chairman at the time, being investigated. We've now got the CEO allegedly now under investigation as well. That's blown my... I was not expecting that answer. Okay, so so we've got...
Wasn't that made plain to you, this investigation?
That's the first thing I've heard of Mr. Reid's alleged, and I will use that word, alleged investigation, but obviously you're claiming that, and I'll probably let the chair come back on that one, because he's been here longer than me to make sure I don't cross the line. What I say.
That doesn't mean I'm less shocked.
They're shocked, good, okay. Well, going back to very quickly the meeting with Miss Mumby, I suppose the question I have is, if you have taken the nod and the wink that you are to slow down compensation to sub-postmasters and postmistresses, to limp it into an election, if that is how you felt you were instructed, my question is two-part. A, why not speak up about it until after you've been released from office? And B, surely you would have felt the need to resign if you felt that the system was indeed working against you in this way, to take a stand and to call out what you thought was malpractice by those in Whitehall towards making sure that compensation was received. You'd understand that the fact this has come out after you've been dismissed would just leads to thinking this is a bit of he said, she said.
Well, and that, of course, there's quite a lot of element to that. The point that I would make is that I said to Nick, we should not do anything to pull the lever on the inquiry, and because we couldn't, that would be against the law, and neither should we pull the lever in respect of compensation, and indeed I said we should increase it. But there was the lever for the biggest amount, which related to the Horizon investment, which I felt put under notice that actually we needed to just be doubly sure, triply sure that we were getting it right in respect of that investment.
And we know to some extent that the lever has been pulled on the Horizon replacement, because it was only January when an extension to Horizon until 2025 was signed, so presumably that is part of this process of pulling the lever, as Henry Staunton puts it, or delaying the investment decision on the replacement from Horizon, which is identified as the biggest of the three biggest costs.
Staunton, obviously, we've heard again from witnesses earlier that one of the things that you're being investigated related to is you trying to shut down a whistleblowing investigation into yourself. Do you deny those accusations?
Yeah, let me just explain what happened. As I said, it was not the first time that Nick had threatened to resign, but I could clearly see he was under, and you'll see it's in this 80-page report, which is not my report, but he had said to me the same things in terms of his salary. So, but it's there in the document. But the key point was that I could see he was in a very pressurised position. This is a tougher job being CEO of the Post Office, I have to say, than all the other companies that I've chaired, just because of the myriad of problems that it has. So on top of this, he was being investigated on an 80-page dossier, and he was really quite upset about it, and I felt it was affecting his emotional and mental state. It was that serious. So he was not supported by the board. So I said to him, look, I will go and talk to the SID. I'm conflicted, but I will go and talk to the SID to see if we can, this myriad charge sheet, if we can just, Nick, you've got to face up to the big ones. But you know, he said, I'll be wiped out from the business for 4 weeks if we go on like that. So we'll just focus on the big ones, but that's a matter for Ben, our SID, to give us a view on. So I rang Ben. I said, look, this is a chief executive that I'm very worried about. This is some way of dealing with him. We've got to show him some support if we can actually. Because to an extent, I thought the HR director was negotiating a better exit package. I mean, that was my assessment when I looked at some of the things that she was talking about. So, and I said that to Ben. So I said we should reduce the charge sheet on Nick to start with. We can come back to the others we feel is relevant, but this man just hasn't got the time or the inclination to deal with the full charge sheet. So can you just look at it? It needs to be. You're conflicted, Henry. I want the 4 lines on me. I'm very happy to talk about. I've completely rejected them. So this was, as I say, this wasn't a big investigation into me. This was a big investigation into Nick, and I didn't realise you weren't aware of that.
You've certainly made news today, Mr. Staunton, I'm sure you've that. Mr. Tidswell informed us that, I think in response to Mr. Higginbottom, apologies if I got the wrong individual, maybe Miss Marston, that he felt, once he had personally informed you of the investigation that would get into you in November, that your behaviour had changed and effectively, I can't quote him perfectly, but had become more erratic and...
Yeah, I saw that.
Do you think that's a fair characterisation, or do you dispute that from Mr.
No, I completely dispute it. And I think that what happened was, as you'll see from the documentation, it was actually the whole thing did get a bit difficult once the postmasters got hold of me, and I wasn't prepared to duck it, but I did a file note and said, we've got to tackle this. At this point, things did get very difficult, and within 10 days... I'd left the company, so I think that was a far bigger issue. But I'm not an erratic. If I'd been an erratic individual when it comes to business, I wouldn't have been the chairman or deputy chairman or main board director of all these companies. That's just not how I am.
Mr. Staunton, I feel like there may be another drama, Mr. Reid and Mr. Staunton versus the Post Office, coming down the track at some stage in the future. Because I might well say, but what I would say is honestly, I'm blown away. What I suppose I'm trying to get to the bottom of here is it right, really, in this myriad of mess, should the politics and the politicians who have been embroiled in this or dragged into this, isn't it right that we really put these individuals to one side?
Absolutely.
And that they're no longer part of this discussion, and we can move on, and I mean the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, and just say that you're not interested in firing in her direction, and now this is about your fight with the Post Office to clear your name and reputation, for clarity to be brought around Mr. Reid now and what his current situation is with the Post Office, and whether or not he is under investigation or not, and whether he is wanting to resign, bearing in mind he also took the oath and said... Sorry, Chair. Isn't the point here now that Mr. Bates has got a point, that maybe the Post Office needs to be buried, and actually sold off, because he said it's such a mess. And the fact we've got the former chairman and the CEO apparently both are under investigation, and both, well, one particularly wants to resign, isn't it? Maybe is it time for the post office to go?
Well,
Mr. Bates right?
That's a really good question, and what I said in January, again, it didn't find favour with UKGI. The only route through this, for me, is demutualisation of the post office. The answer is where I think the postmasters have a stake in the business, and I haven't got my mind right quite how we would have done it, but the action, we cannot have the postmaster. This got nothing. This should all, the discussion should all be about the postmasters and justice for those who have been convicted, and we mustn't forget a reasonable living for those that work within the post office business now, which is actually not a sufficiently remunerated business. That's what this whole thing should be about, and so it shouldn't be about another TV program about Mr. Reeves' sort of. It's a pointless waste of time. That doesn't actually further the cause of the postmasters one bit. So Mr. Bates is right. I'm not sure that Amazon is right. I think it would be more powerful if we had a demutualisation. That's why I wanted at least one more post office director on the board. My preference would be to have 2, and then we'd have 4 postmaster directors on the board, which would be the start of that journey. And I would have, you've seen in the file note, I would have 2 of them actually managing a committee that was all about the culture within this department. I would have one of them chairing the remuneration committee, because I think that would actually sort out some of the issues you raise about bonuses, backdating pay deals, putting multipliers on all the bonuses when they should only go to objectives, which I think you covered all. Because I think on the governance on REM is a really big point which you raised, because actually when we came to see you last time, we just talked about that TIS scheme. All the other issues about backdating the postmasters, applying the wrong multipliers to the wrong bonuses, all of those stuff was not covered at that meeting. So I think...
but you understand quickly, Mr. Staunton, I promised you last thing. You appreciate that with the former chairman, who was then the current chairman, and the CEO, now apparently both under investigation, sub-postmasters and postmistresses are going to think they are literally bottom of the pile when it comes to them being focused on when the 2 most senior people in the organisation are at war with its employer.
Well, I wouldn't classify it as war. I mean, this was a complaint.
It's not harmony, Mr. Staunton.
Of course it's not. Of course. And actually, it doesn't further the cause of the postmaster. That is the key point about all of this, is that we need to get back to talking, and I think the committee covered it, but all sorts of other issues came to be involved, and I think we'll talk about the SID process, etc., which I'm very happy to do.
Yeah, sorry,
but it is mainly about the postmasters. That is why I went public in the Sunday Times article, and one of the problems, of course, if you go to the Sunday Times, is of course you lose control of the narrative to a certain extent, and the focus of the article became much more about government and not about the postmasters.
And I think it's fair to say that we've not.
That was the heading, and it was also the thrust of the article. And but you lose.
But you've helped us fill out